The morning sun cast long shadows across the training grounds of Naval Amphibious Base Coronado as Lieutenant Sarah Chun adjusted her gear bag and walked toward the main briefing facility. The salty breeze carried the familiar sounds of early morning training sessions, the rhythmic chants of instructors pushing recruits to their limits, and the distant crash of waves against the shore. For Sarah, this base had been home for the past 18 months, but today felt different somehow. She had received orders the night before to report for a special briefing at 0800 hours. The message had been brief and cryptic, signed only by the base commander's office. As a Navy intelligence officer with specialized training in counterterrorism operations, Sarah was accustomed to sudden assignments and classified missions. Her compact frame and unassuming appearance often worked to her advantage in intelligence gathering, allowing her to blend into crowds and observe without drawing attention. What most people didn't know about Sarah Chun was that her personnel file read like something from a spy novel. Born to Chinese immigrants who had fled to America with nothing but determination and hope, Sarah had excelled academically from an early age. She had graduated summa cum laude from Georgetown University with degrees in international relations and Mandarin studies before being recruited directly into Navy intelligence. Her language skills were extraordinary. She spoke fluent Mandarin, Arabic, Russian, and Spanish, making her invaluable for overseas operations. During her 3 years of active service, Sarah had completed 2 classified missions in the Middle East that had earned her commendations from the highest levels of military command. She had spent 8 months embedded with CIA operatives in Afghanistan, providing crucial intelligence that had led to the disruption of 3 major terrorist cells. Her work had been so exemplary that she had been fast-tracked for promotion and had earned the respect of senior officers across multiple branches of the military. But none of that mattered to the 3 Navy SEALs who were lounging near the entrance to the briefing facility as Sarah approached. Fresh from completing their grueling training at Basic Underwater Demolition School, Petty Officers Jake Martinez, Kyle Thompson, and Brad Stevens carried themselves with the swagger that came from surviving one of the military's most challenging programs. They had earned their Trident pins just 2 weeks earlier and were still riding high on the adrenaline of their achievement. Jake Martinez, a stocky former college football player from Texas, was the unofficial leader of the trio. His broad shoulders and confident grin made him popular with his peers, but his tendency to judge people quickly had gotten him into trouble before. Kyle Thompson, tall and lean with sandy hair, came from a military family and carried himself with the precision of someone who had been around military protocol his entire life. Brad Stevens, the youngest of the group at 22, was eager to prove himself and often pushed boundaries to gain acceptance from his teammates. As Sarah walked past them toward the building entrance, Jake nudged his companions and smirked. The 3 SEALs had noticed her before during their time on base, but they had never bothered to learn her name or position. To them, she was just another support staff member who happened to wear Navy utilities. Her small stature and quiet demeanor reinforced their assumption that she was probably a yeoman or supply specialist. "Morning, sailor," Jake called out with a condescending tone that immediately caught Sarah's attention. She turned to face the 3 men, her expression neutral but alert. Years of intelligence training had taught her to read people quickly, and she could see the mixture of arrogance and ignorance in their faces. "Good morning," Sarah replied evenly, her voice carrying no emotion but maintaining professional courtesy. She had learned long ago that engaging with prejudice often only escalated situations unnecessarily. Kyle stepped forward with a grin that didn't reach his eyes. "You look a little lost there. The administrative buildings are on the other side of base. This area is for combat personnel only." His tone was casual but dismissive, the kind of voice someone might use when giving directions to a tourist. Sarah felt a familiar tightness in her chest that she had experienced countless times throughout her career. The assumption that she didn't belong in certain spaces because of her gender or appearance was nothing new, but it never stopped being frustrating. She took a deep breath and reminded herself that these young men had no idea who she was or what she had accomplished. "I'm exactly where I need to be," Sarah responded calmly, shifting her gear bag to her other shoulder. "I have a briefing at 0800. Brad Stevens let out a short laugh that was clearly meant to be heard. A briefing? What kind of briefing would they need? He paused and looked her up and down with obvious skepticism. "What's your rate anyway?" The question hung in the air like a challenge. Sarah could feel the weight of the moment, understanding that how she responded would set the tone for whatever came next. She had faced similar situations before, and she had learned that there were times when it was better to let actions speak louder than words. "Lieutenant," Sarah said simply, her voice carrying the quiet confidence that came from knowing her own worth. The three SEALs exchanged glances, their expressions shifting from amusement to confusion. Jake's grin faded slightly as he processed what she had said. In the military hierarchy, a lieutenant outranked all three of them significantly. Kyle's posture stiffened as he realized that their casual disrespect might have serious consequences. "Lieutenant what?" Jake asked, his tone now carrying a hint of uncertainty that hadn't been there before. "Lieutenant Chun, Naval Intelligence," Sarah replied, pulling her identification from her pocket and holding it up for them to see. The laminated card clearly displayed her rank, name, and security clearance level. The silence that followed was heavy with tension. Brad Stevens' face flushed red as he realized the magnitude of their mistake. They had just casually insulted and dismissed a commissioned officer who outranked them by several pay grades. In military protocol, such behavior could result in formal disciplinary action that could end their careers before they had truly begun. Kyle was the first to attempt damage control. "Ma'am, we didn't realize. We weren't trying to." He stammered, clearly struggling to find words that might somehow undo the last few minutes. But Jake Martinez, perhaps driven by embarrassment or the need to save face in front of his peers, doubled down instead of backing away. "Look, no offense, but you don't exactly look like Navy intelligence material. What kind of operations could you possibly be qualified for?" The question revealed the depth of his ignorance and prejudice. Sarah felt a flash of anger that she quickly suppressed. She had spent years proving herself in situations far more dangerous and challenging than anything these fresh graduates had experienced. She had risked her life in foreign countries, gathered intelligence that had saved American lives, and earned the respect of some of the most elite military personnel in the world. "The kind that are classified above your clearance level," Sarah replied, her voice remaining steady despite her growing irritation. Jake's face reddened, and he took a step closer to Sarah. His body language became more aggressive, and his voice rose slightly. "Listen here, Lieutenant, or whatever you are, I don't know what desk job got you those bars, but out here in the real Navy, respect is earned through actions, not paperwork." The confrontation was escalating quickly, and Sarah could see that she was facing a choice. She could walk away and avoid further conflict, or she could stand her ground and address the blatant disrespect that was being shown not just to her, but to her rank and position. Her training told her that backing down now would only embolden this kind of behavior in the future. "Petty Officer Martinez," Sarah said, reading his name tape, "I suggest you check your tone and remember who you're speaking to." The use of his name caught Jake off guard. He hadn't expected her to know who he was, and the formal way she addressed him reminded him of the military hierarchy that he was currently violating. But instead of backing down, his pride pushed him to continue the confrontation. "Or what?" Jake challenged, crossing his arms over his chest. "You're going to run to your supervisor and complain that the big bad SEALs hurt your feelings?" Kyle and Brad exchanged nervous glances. They could see that their friend was making a serious mistake, but the dynamics of their group made it difficult for them to openly contradict him. They were caught between loyalty to their teammate and the growing realization that they were witnessing something that could have serious consequences for all of them. Sarah took a deep breath and made a decision that would change the trajectory of the entire situation. Instead of escalating the confrontation further, she chose to take a step back and give the young men one final opportunity to correct their behavior. "Gentlemen," she said, her voice carrying the authority of her rank and experience, "I'm going to walk into that building now for my briefing. I suggest you take some time to think about military protocol and the proper way to address a superior officer. If you have questions about my qualifications or experience, I'm sure your commanding officer would be happy to explain the chain of command to you." With that, Sarah turned and walked toward the building entrance, leaving the three SEALs standing in stunned silence. As she reached for the door handle, she could hear them behind her, their voices low but agitated as they debated what had just happened and what they should do about it. Jake's voice carried clearly in the morning air as he said, "I don't care what rank she claims to have. There's no way someone like that belongs in naval intelligence. She's probably just some diversity hire who got promoted for political reasons." Sarah paused with her hand on the door handle. The comment hit her like a physical blow, not because it was particularly original, but because it encapsulated everything she had been fighting against throughout her entire career. The assumption that her achievements were somehow illegitimate, that her success was based on anything other than merit and hard work, was a wound that never seemed to heal completely. For a moment, she considered turning around and confronting Jake directly. She thought about explaining her background, her missions, her accomplishments, and everything she had sacrificed to reach her current position. But then she remembered the advice her mentor had given her years ago about choosing her battles wisely. Instead, Sarah opened the door and stepped inside the building, leaving the three SEALs to continue their discussion without her presence. What she didn't know was that their conversation would soon be overheard by someone who would change everything about their morning in ways they could never have imagined. As the door closed behind her, Sarah took a moment to compose herself before heading to the briefing room. She had learned long ago that carrying anger or frustration into professional situations only diminished her effectiveness. Whatever was waiting for her in that briefing room deserved her full attention and focus. The hallway was quiet and cool, a stark contrast to the heated confrontation she had just experienced outside. Her footsteps echoed softly on the polished floor as she made her way toward the designated conference room. The building housed several important command functions, and she passed offices belonging to senior staff members and department heads. As she walked, Sarah reflected on the morning's events and tried to put them into perspective. The behavior of the three SEALs was unfortunately familiar, but it still served as a reminder of the challenges that women and minorities continued to face in military service. Despite all the progress that had been made in recent years, incidents like this demonstrated that changing attitudes and perceptions was an ongoing process. But Sarah also knew that for every Jake Martinez who questioned her legitimacy, there were dozens of other service members who judged her solely on her performance and capabilities. Her commanding officers had consistently rated her among the top performers in her field, and her colleagues in naval intelligence respected her expertise and professionalism. The briefing room door was marked with a simple placard that read Conference Room B. Sarah checked her watch and saw that she was arriving with 5 minutes to spare. Punctuality was one of the many military virtues that had been drilled into her during her training, and she took pride in always being prepared and on time. As she reached for the door handle, Sarah heard footsteps approaching from behind her in the hallway. She turned to see a tall figure in dress blues walking toward her with purpose and authority. Even from a distance, she could see the distinctive insignia of a senior officer, and she immediately recognized the bearing and presence of someone who held significant command responsibility. Admiral James Morrison cut an imposing figure as he strode down the hallway toward the conference room. At 55 years old, he had spent over 3 decades in naval service, rising through the ranks from a young ensign fresh out of the Naval Academy to his current position as base commander of Naval Amphibious Base Coronado. His silver hair was perfectly groomed, his uniform immaculate, and his bearing reflected the confidence that came from commanding one of the Navy's most critical training facilities. What made Admiral Morrison particularly respected among his subordinates was not just his rank, but his genuine care for the welfare and development of the personnel under his command. He had made it a point throughout his career to know the stories and backgrounds of his key officers, especially those who were making significant contributions to naval operations. His reputation for fairness and attention to detail had earned him the loyalty of everyone from senior staff to the newest recruits. As he approached the conference room, Admiral Morrison's sharp eyes immediately recognized Lieutenant Sarah Chun waiting by the door. He had been looking forward to this meeting for several weeks, ever since receiving the classified briefing about her latest assignment. What he was about to discuss with Lieutenant Chun would have far-reaching implications for naval intelligence operations in the Pacific Theater. Lieutenant Chun, Admiral Morrison called out as he approached, his voice carrying the warm but professional tone he used with officers he particularly respected. Sarah turned and came to attention immediately, offering a crisp salute. "Good morning, Admiral Morrison, sir." The Admiral returned her salute with equal precision before extending his hand for a handshake. "It's good to see you again, Lieutenant. I trust you're ready for what we're about to discuss." "Yes, sir," Sarah replied, though she had to admit to herself that she was curious about the nature of this special briefing. The Admiral's tone suggested that whatever was coming was significant. As they moved toward the conference room door, Admiral Morrison paused and looked at Sarah with concern. "Is everything all right, Lieutenant? You seem a bit tense this morning." Sarah hesitated for a moment, debating whether to mention the incident outside. Her training in diplomacy and her natural inclination toward professionalism made her reluctant to burden a senior officer with what might be seen as petty interpersonal conflicts. "Everything is fine, sir," she replied, just preparing mentally for the briefing. Admiral Morrison studied her face for a moment longer. His years of command experience had taught him to read people well, and he could sense that something had happened. However, he also respected Sarah's choice not to elaborate, understanding that she would bring it to his attention if it became necessary. "Very well," he said, opening the conference room door. "Shall we proceed?" The conference room was spacious and well-appointed, with a large oak table surrounded by leather chairs. Maps and charts covered one wall, while another featured a large flat-screen monitor for presentations. The room was designed to accommodate high-level strategic discussions and classified briefings. As they entered, Admiral Morrison gestured toward one of the chairs. "Please have a seat, Lieutenant. We have quite a bit to cover this morning." Sarah settled into her chair and opened her notebook, ready to take detailed notes. She had learned early in her career that thorough documentation was essential in intelligence work, especially when dealing with sensitive or classified information. Admiral Morrison took his seat at the head of the table and opened a classified folder that had been waiting for him. The red stripe along the edge indicated its high-security classification, and Sarah could see that it contained several photographs and documents. "Lieutenant Chun," the Admiral began, his tone becoming more formal as they moved into official business. "What I'm about to discuss with you is classified at the highest levels. The information in this briefing is compartmentalized and should not be shared with anyone who doesn't have specific need-to-know authorization." "Understood, sir," Sarah replied, her attention fully focused on the Admiral's words. 3 weeks ago, our intelligence assets in the South China Sea intercepted communications that suggest a major shift in regional military posturing. We believe that several hostile nations are coordinating activities that could threaten both our allies and our strategic interests in the Pacific. Admiral Morrison opened the folder and slid several photographs across the table to Sarah. The images showed satellite footage of naval vessels and military installations in various locations throughout the region. Your linguistic capabilities and your background in regional politics make you uniquely qualified for what we need, the Admiral continued. We're putting together a joint intelligence operation with our allies in Japan and South Korea. The mission will require someone who can operate effectively in multilingual environments and who has experience with counterintelligence protocols. Sarah studied the photographs carefully, her mind already beginning to process the strategic implications of what she was seeing. The scope of the operation was clearly significant, involving multiple nations and high-stakes intelligence gathering. "What would be my specific role in this operation, sir?" she asked, looking up from the documents. "You would be serving as the primary intelligence liaison between our forces and our ally partners. Your job would be to coordinate information sharing, verify intelligence authenticity, and help develop strategic responses to emerging threats." The Admiral paused and leaned forward slightly, his expression becoming even more serious. "Lieutenant, I want to be completely honest with you about what this assignment entails. You would be operating in potentially hostile territory for extended periods. The work would be dangerous, and the strategic importance of the mission means that failure is not an option." Sarah felt a familiar surge of adrenaline that came with the prospect of challenging and important work. Throughout her career, she had sought out assignments that would allow her to make a meaningful contribution to national security, even when they involved personal risk. "Understand, sir," she replied without hesitation. "When would the operation begin?" "If you accept the assignment, you would deploy in 6 weeks. That would give us time to complete your specialized briefings and coordinate with our international partners." Admiral Morrison closed the folder and studied Sarah's expression carefully. "I should mention that this assignment comes with significant professional benefits. Successful completion would likely result in promotion to lieutenant commander and would position you for important roles in naval intelligence for years to come." The offer was everything that Sarah had been working toward throughout her career. The opportunity to lead a major international intelligence operation would be a career-defining achievement that would open doors to even more significant responsibilities in the future. "Sir, I'm honored by your confidence in my abilities," Sarah said. "I would very much like to accept this assignment." Admiral Morrison smiled, clearly pleased by her response. "Excellent. I was hoping you would say that. Your reputation precedes you, Lieutenant, and I have complete confidence that you'll excel in this role." He stood up and moved to the wall-mounted monitor, pressing several buttons to bring up a detailed map of the Pacific region. "Let me show you some of the specific areas where you'll be operating." As the Admiral began outlining the geographical scope of the mission, Sarah found herself thinking about the irony of the morning's events. While 3 young SEALs outside had been questioning her qualifications and legitimacy, she was sitting in a classified briefing being offered one of the most important intelligence assignments currently available in the Pacific theater. The contrast was striking and served as a reminder of the gap between perception and reality that she navigated constantly in her professional life. Her actual responsibilities and accomplishments bore little resemblance to the assumptions that people often made about her based on superficial observations. Meanwhile, outside the building, Jake Martinez, Kyle Thompson, and Brad Stevens were still standing near the entrance, their conversation having evolved from dismissive comments about Sarah to growing concerns about the potential consequences of their behavior. Kyle had been the first to suggest that they might have made a serious mistake. "Guys, what if she really is a lieutenant? What if she reports us for disrespecting a superior officer?" Brad was pacing nervously, his earlier bravado completely gone. "My dad always told me that the military doesn't tolerate disrespect toward officers, regardless of the circumstances. He said it was one of the fastest ways to destroy a career." But Jake remained defiant. Even as doubt began to creep into his voice. "Look, even if she is an officer, which I seriously doubt, we didn't do anything that terrible. We were just asking questions and expressing our opinions. It's not like we threatened her or anything." "Jake, we basically told a commissioned officer that she didn't belong here and questioned her qualifications," Cal pointed out. "In what world is that not a serious problem?" The conversation was interrupted by the approach of Chief Petty Officer Rodriguez, a veteran SEAL instructor who had been observing their discussion from a distance. Chief Rodriguez was known throughout the base for his no-nonsense approach to leadership and his ability to spot trouble before it escalated. "Morning, gentlemen," Chief Rodriguez said as he approached the group. His tone was neutral, but his expression suggested that he had heard at least part of their conversation. "Mind if I ask, what has you all looking so concerned?" The 3 young SEALs exchanged nervous glances, none of them eager to explain their situation to a senior enlisted leader. Chief Rodriguez had a reputation for being fair, but strict, and they knew that any misstep could result in additional training, disciplinary action, or worse. Jake decided to take the lead, hoping to control the narrative. "Chief, we had a brief interaction with someone who claimed to be a Navy lieutenant. There seemed to be some confusion about protocol and procedures." Chief Rodriguez raised an eyebrow at the careful wording of Jake's explanation. His years of experience had taught him to read between the lines when young sailors were trying to downplay their mistakes. "Someone who claimed to be a lieutenant?" he asked. "That's interesting phrasing. Are you suggesting that this person was impersonating an officer?" "No, sir," Kyle interjected quickly, realizing that Jake's attempt to minimize the situation was only making things worse. "We're just not sure about the proper protocol when we're not certain about someone's rank or position." Chief Rodriguez studied the three men carefully. He had seen countless similar situations over the years, usually involving young personnel who had made assumptions about other service members based on appearance or gender. "Gentlemen, let me ask you a direct question," Chief Rodriguez said, his tone becoming more serious. "Did you show proper respect to this individual regardless of whether you were certain about their rank?" The silence that followed was answer enough. Chief Rodriguez had dealt with this exact scenario multiple times, and he could predict how the conversation would unfold. Young military personnel, especially those fresh from elite training programs, sometimes developed an inflated sense of their own importance that led them to make poor decisions about how to treat their colleagues. "I see," Chief Rodriguez said quietly. "And where did this interaction take place?" "Right here, outside the building," Brad answered, gesturing toward the entrance. "About 15 minutes ago." Chief Rodriguez nodded thoughtfully. He knew that the building housed several important command functions, and that senior officers frequently used the conference rooms for classified briefings and strategic planning sessions. "Can you describe this individual?" he asked. "Small Asian woman, probably mid-20s, wearing standard Navy utilities," Jake replied, his tone still carrying a hint of skepticism. Chief Rodriguez felt a sinking sensation as the description registered in his mind. There is only one person matching that description who would have legitimate business in the building at this time of day, and the implications of what these young men had done were far more serious than they realized. "Gentlemen," Chief Rodriguez said slowly, "I believe you may have just made the biggest mistake of your military careers." The weight of his words settled over the three SEALs like a heavy blanket. Kyle's face went pale as he began to understand the gravity of their situation. Brad started to speak, but found that no words would come. Jake's defiant expression finally began to crack as he realized that their instructor's concern was genuine. "Chief, what do you mean?" Kyle managed to ask. "The person you're describing is Lieutenant Sarah Chun, Naval Intelligence," Chief Rodriguez explained. "She's one of the most highly regarded intelligence officers on this base, with multiple classified assignments and commendations from senior command." The information hit the three men like a physical blow. Jake felt his stomach drop as he realized that everything he had said and assumed had been completely wrong. Kyle closed his eyes and shook his head, understanding that his military career might be over before it had truly begun. Brad looked like he might be sick. "But that's not the worst part," Chief Rodriguez continued. "Lieutenant Chun is currently in a classified briefing with Admiral Morrison himself. She's being considered for a major assignment that would represent one of the most important intelligence operations currently being planned in the Pacific Theater." The revelation was devastating. Not only had they disrespected a superior officer, but they had done so to someone who was clearly held in high regard by the highest levels of command. The prospect of Admiral Morrison learning about their behavior was terrifying beyond words. "Chief, what should we do?" Kyle asked desperately. "Is there any way to fix this?" Chief Rodriguez looked at the three young men with a mixture of disappointment and sympathy. He remembered being young and making mistakes, but he also understood that some errors in judgment had consequences that couldn't be easily undone. "The first thing you need to do is understand exactly what you've done wrong," he said. "Then you need to prepare for the possibility that this incident will come to the attention of your commanding officers. As Chief Rodriguez continued to explain the seriousness of their situation, none of them noticed the figure approaching the building in trance behind them. Admiral Morrison had concluded his briefing with Lieutenant Chun and was preparing to leave for his next appointment. What he was about to witness would change the entire trajectory of the morning's events in ways that no one could have predicted. Admiral Morrison emerged from the building entrance with a satisfied feeling that came from conducting a successful briefing. His meeting with Lieutenant Chun had gone even better than expected, and he was confident that she would excel in her upcoming assignment. Her professionalism and expertise had impressed him once again, reinforcing his decision to select her for this critical mission. As he stepped outside into the bright California morning, Admiral Morrison's attention was immediately drawn to the group of men standing near the entrance. He recognized Chief Rodriguez, a respected veteran whom he had worked with on several occasions. The three younger men appeared to be recent SEAL graduates based on their bearing and the conversation he could overhear. What caught the Admiral's attention, however, was the serious tone of their discussion and the obvious distress visible on the faces of the three young men. His years of command experience had taught him to recognize when personnel were dealing with significant problems, and something about this situation warranted his attention. Admiral Morrison adjusted his path slightly, moving close enough to hear Chief Rodriguez's words clearly. What he heard made him stop in his tracks. Lieutenant Chun is not someone you want to cross, Chief Rodriguez was explaining to the three SEALs. She's earned her position through merit and has proven herself in situations that would challenge anyone in this military. The fact that you questioned her legitimacy based on her appearance shows exactly the kind of thinking that has no place in today's Navy. The Admiral felt a surge of anger as he began to understand what had transpired. Lieutenant Chin's slight tension during their meeting suddenly made perfect sense. While he had been briefing her on one of the most important assignments of her career, she had been dealing with disrespect and prejudice from junior personnel who had made assumptions about her qualifications. Jake Martinez chose that moment to speak up, his voice carrying a defensive tone that revealed he still hadn't fully grasped the severity of his mistake. "Look, Chief, I understand she's an officer, but you have to admit that she doesn't look like what you'd expect from naval intelligence." "I mean, how was I supposed to know?" Admiral Morrison stepped forward before Chief Rodriguez could respond, his presence immediately commanding the attention of everyone in the group. The three young SEALs snapped to attention as they recognized the Admiral's rank insignia, their faces reflecting a mixture of surprise and growing dread. "Because Petty Officer Martinez," Admiral Morrison said, his voice carrying the full weight of his authority, "a professional military service member shows proper respect to all personnel regardless of their appearance, and certainly doesn't make assumptions about someone's qualifications based on gender or ethnicity." The silence that followed was deafening. Jake's face went from red to pale as he realized that his conversation had been overheard by the base commander himself. Kyle and Brad stood frozen, understanding that their situation had just escalated beyond anything they could have imagined. Chief Rodriguez came to attention and saluted. "Admiral Morrison, sir. I was just addressing a situation involving proper military protocol." Admiral Morrison returned the salute before turning his full attention to the three young SEALs. His expression was stern but controlled, reflecting the discipline that had served him well throughout his career in dealing with serious personnel issues. "Gentlemen," the Admiral said, his tone leaving no doubt about his displeasure, "I just finished a classified briefing with Lieutenant Chun regarding her selection for one of the most critical intelligence assignments currently being planned by Naval Command. She is one of the most qualified and respected officers under my command, with a record of service that includes multiple classified missions and commendation from the highest levels of military leadership." Jake opened his mouth as if to speak, but Admiral Morrison held up a hand to stop him. "I'm not finished, Petty Officer. What I overheard just now tells me that you and your colleagues have demonstrated exactly the kind of prejudice and unprofessional behavior that undermines the effectiveness and reputation of this entire command." Admiral Morrison paused and looked at each of the three men individually, making sure his words had their full attention. The fact that you would question an officer's legitimacy based on her appearance, make assumptions about her qualifications because of her gender, and suggest that her achievements are somehow unearned shows a fundamental lack of understanding about what it means to serve in today's Navy. Kyle found his voice first, his words coming out in a rush of desperation. "Sir, we didn't mean any disrespect. We just made a mistaken judgment." "A mistaken judgment," Admiral Morrison repeated, his tone sharp. "Petty Officer Thompson, what you demonstrated this morning wasn't a simple mistake. It was a pattern of thinking that has no place in a professional military organization." The Admiral turned to Chief Rodriguez. "Chief, I want a full report on this incident filed with my office by the end of the day. Include recommendations for appropriate disciplinary action and additional training that might address the underlying issues demonstrated here." "Yes, sir," Chief Rodriguez replied crisply. Admiral Morrison then addressed the 3 SEALs directly. "You will report to your commanding officer immediately and provide a complete account of this morning's events. You will also prepare formal written apologies to Lieutenant Chun, though I doubt that will be sufficient to repair the damage you've done to your professional reputations." Brad Stevens finally spoke up, his voice barely above a whisper. "Sir, is there anything we can do to make this right?" Admiral Morrison studied the young man's face, seeing genuine remorse that hadn't been present in the others. "Petty Officer Stevens, the first step in making anything right is understanding what you did wrong. Do you understand the problem with your behavior this morning?" "Yes, sir," Brad replied. "We judged Lieutenant Chun based on assumptions instead of treating her with the respect that every service member deserves, regardless of their rank." "That's part of it," Admiral Morrison acknowledged. "But the deeper issue is that you allowed prejudice to override your professional training. You forgot that diversity of background and perspective is a strength, not a weakness, and that the Navy's effectiveness depends on recognizing and utilizing the talents of all our personnel." Admiral Morrison's expression softened slightly as he continued. "Lieutenant Chun speaks 5 languages fluently, has completed classified missions in some of the most dangerous regions of the world, and has provided intelligence that has literally saved American lives. Her qualifications and achievements exceed those of most officers with twice her years of service." The information was devastating to Jake, who had so confidently dismissed her capabilities just an hour earlier. The reality of his misjudgment was beginning to sink in, and he could see his military career potentially derailing because of his prejudice and pride. "Sir," Jake said quietly, "I apologize for my behavior and my assumptions. You're right that I let prejudice cloud my judgment." Admiral Morrison nodded, but didn't smile. "Apologies are a start, Petty Officer Martinez, but what matters now is whether you can learn from this experience and become a better leader and service member." At that moment, the building entrance opened again, and Lieutenant Chun emerged, carrying her briefing materials and clearly preparing to leave for her next appointment. When she saw the group gathered outside, her expression remained neutral, but Admiral Morrison could see the slight tension in her posture that indicated she recognized the situation. "Lieutenant Chun," Admiral Morrison called out, "could you join us for a moment, please?" Sarah approached the group, maintaining her professional composure despite the awkwardness of the situation. She had hoped to avoid any further interaction with the 3 SEALs, but she understood that Admiral Morrison's request was not optional. "Yes, sir," she replied, coming to attention. Admiral Morrison turned to face the 3 young SEALs. "Gentlemen, this is Lieutenant Sarah Chun, Naval Intelligence. She holds a security clearance higher than any of you are likely to achieve in your careers, and she has just been selected for an assignment that will have strategic implications for national security." The formal introduction served to emphasize the magnitude of their error in judgment. Kyle felt physically ill as he realized how completely wrong their assumptions had been. The woman they had dismissed as unqualified was exactly the kind of elite professional that they had aspired to become. "Lieutenant Chun," Admiral Morrison continued, "these gentlemen have something they would like to say to you." Sarah looked at the 3 men, seeing their obvious distress and embarrassment. While she was still angry about their earlier behavior, she also recognized that they were young and had clearly learned a painful lesson about the consequences of prejudice and assumptions. Jake stepped forward first, his voice shaky but sincere. "Lieutenant Shun, I want to apologize for my behavior this morning. My comments and assumptions were completely inappropriate and unprofessional. You deserve better from a fellow service member." Kyle and Brad followed with their own apologies, each acknowledging their role in the incident and expressing genuine remorse for their actions. Sarah listened to their words carefully, evaluating their sincerity. Her years and intelligence had taught her to read people well, and she could see that their regret was genuine. However, she also understood that this was a teachable moment that went beyond individual apologies. "Gentlemen," Sarah replied, her voice calm but firm, "I appreciate your apologies, but I want you to understand that this isn't really about me. This is about how you approach your service and how you treat your fellow personnel." She paused and looked at each of them individually. "In your careers, you will work with people from every background imaginable. Women, minorities, people from different religions and cultures, and personnel with different specialties and training. Your effectiveness as leaders and teammates will depend on your ability to recognize and respect the contributions that everyone brings to the mission." Admiral Morrison watched with approval as Lieutenant Shun handled the situation with grace and professionalism. Her response demonstrated exactly why she had been selected for important leadership roles and why she had earned the respect of senior command. "The military works because we focus on performance and character rather than superficial characteristics," Sarah continued. "When you make assumptions about people based on their appearance or background, you not only insult them, but you also weaken your own ability to accomplish the mission." Jake nodded seriously, clearly processing her words. "You're right, ma'am. We let our assumptions override our training and our values. What matters now is what you do next," Sarah replied. "This can either be a career-ending mistake or a learning experience that makes you better leaders and better people. That choice is up to you." Admiral Morrison stepped forward, indicating that the discussion was coming to an end. "Lieutenant Shun, thank you for your professionalism in handling this situation. I know you have other appointments today." "Thank you, sir," Sarah replied with a salute. She nodded to Chief Rodriguez and the three SEALs before heading toward her vehicle. As she walked away, Admiral Morrison turned his attention back to the three young men who were still standing at attention. "Gentlemen, you have witnessed something this morning that I hope you will remember for the rest of your careers. You have seen what real professionalism looks like under pressure." He paused and let his words sink in before continuing. "Lieutenant Shun had every right to be angry with you, and she had every right to demand serious disciplinary action. Instead, she chose to use this as a teaching moment and to focus on your potential for growth rather than your mistakes." The Admiral's expression remained serious as he delivered his final message. "That is the mark of a true leader, and it is exactly the kind of character that has earned her the respect of everyone who has worked with her. I suggest you spend some time thinking about the difference between her response and your initial behavior." Chief Rodriguez stepped forward. "Sir, I'll ensure that these men understand the full implications of today's events and that they receive appropriate guidance going forward." "Thank you, Chief," Admiral Morrison replied. "I'm counting on you to help them learn from this experience." With that, Admiral Morrison headed toward his own vehicle, leaving Chief Rodriguez to continue the difficult conversation with the three chastened SEALs. As he walked away, he reflected on the morning's events and what they revealed about both the challenges and the progress that the Navy continued to make in building a more inclusive and professional force. The incident had been unfortunate, but Admiral Morrison was optimistic that it would ultimately result in three better service members who had learned valuable lessons about respect, professionalism, and the dangers of prejudice. He was also proud of how Lieutenant Shun had handled the situation, confirming once again that his confidence in her abilities was well-founded. Over the following days, Word of the incident spread throughout Naval Amphibious Base Coronado in the way that significant events often do in military communities. The story became a topic of conversation in mess halls, training facilities, and barracks rooms across the base. However, the narrative that emerged was more complex and nuanced than a simple tale of misconduct and discipline. Chief Rodriguez had taken Admiral Morrison's instructions seriously and had spent considerable time with Jake Martinez, Cal Thompson, and Brad Stevens, helping them understand not just what they had done wrong, but why it mattered for their future as military leaders. His approach was firm but constructive, focusing on education rather than simply punishment. The military is changing, and it has to change, Chief Rodriguez explained during one of their counseling sessions. We're dealing with threats that require different kinds of expertise and different perspectives. The days when we could rely only on traditional approaches are over. He had pulled up Lieutenant Chin's unclassified service record to show them the breadth of her qualifications and achievements. While the specific details of her classified missions couldn't be shared, even the public portions of her record were impressive enough to demonstrate how wrong their assumptions had been. Lieutenant Chun graduated first in her class from the Defense Language Institute. Chief Rodriguez read from the file. She holds advanced certifications in counterintelligence, regional analysis, and cross-cultural communication. Her performance evaluations have been consistently outstanding, and she's been selected for accelerated promotion twice. Jake listened to the recitation with growing shame. Each new detail about Sarah's qualifications made his earlier comments seem more ignorant and prejudiced. He was beginning to understand that his behavior hadn't just been rude. It had been fundamentally wrong in ways that went to the core of what it meant to be a professional service member. "Chief," Jake said quietly, "how do I fix something like this? How do I become a kind of leader who doesn't make these mistakes?" Chief Rodriguez set down the file and looked at the young man seriously. "The first step is acknowledging that this wasn't just a momentary lapse in judgment. This was the result of attitudes and assumptions that you've probably been carrying for a long time." He leaned back in his chair and continued. "The Navy doesn't just want you to follow orders and stay out of trouble. We need leaders who can work with people from every possible background, who can recognize talent regardless of where it comes from, and who can adapt to changing situations and requirements." Kyle, who had been mostly silent during these sessions, finally spoke up. "Chief, what can we do to demonstrate that we've learned from this? What would prove that we're serious about changing?" "That's the right question," Chief Rodriguez replied. "But the answer isn't something you can do once and move on. This is about changing how you think and how you approach every interaction you have with your fellow service members." Meanwhile, Lieutenant Chun was dealing with her own aftermath from the incident. While she had handled the confrontation professionally, the experience had left her reflecting on the ongoing challenges that women and minorities continued to face in military service. Her friend and colleague, Lieutenant Commander Maria Vasquez, had listened to Sarah's account of the morning's events with a mixture of anger and frustration that was familiar to both women. As a Latina officer who had faced similar challenges throughout her career, Maria understood the emotional toll that such incidents could take. "The worst part is that this stuff still surprises people," Maria said as they shared coffee in the base exchange. "Like we should be beyond this by now, but every few months something happens that reminds you that we're still fighting the same battles." Sarah stirred her coffee thoughtfully. "What bothered me wasn't really their initial assumptions. I mean, those were wrong and hurtful, but people make mistakes. What bothered me was the doubling down, the refusal to consider that they might be wrong even when presented with evidence. That's the real problem," Maria agreed. "It's not just unconscious bias. It's the conscious choice to maintain that bias even when it doesn't make sense." However, Sarah had also been encouraged by Admiral Morrison's response and by Chief Rodriguez's obvious commitment to using the incident as a learning opportunity rather than simply pursuing punishment. She had seen similar situations handled poorly in the past, with leadership either ignoring the problem or responding in ways that created resentment rather than understanding. At least this time, people in authority took it seriously and tried to address the underlying issues, Sarah said. That doesn't always happen. 3 weeks after the initial incident, something unexpected occurred that would change the trajectory of the entire situation. Lieutenant Chun was walking across the base when she encountered Brad Stevens, who was alone and appeared to be waiting for someone. "Lieutenant Chun," Brad called out as she approached. "Could I speak with you for a moment, ma'am?" Sarah paused, curious about what the young SEAL might want to discuss. Of the 3 men involved in the original incident, Brad had seemed the most genuinely remorseful, and his subsequent behavior had suggested that he was taking the situation seriously. "Of course, Petty Officer Stevens," she replied. "What's on your mind?" Brad looked nervous but determined. "Ma'am, I want to talk to you about something Chief Rodriguez mentioned during our counseling sessions. He said that the best way to learn from mistakes like this is to understand different perspectives and to challenge our own assumptions." Sarah nodded, interested to see where this conversation was heading. "I was wondering," Brad continued, "if you would be willing to speak to our SEAL class about your career and your experiences. I think it would help all of us understand better what we don't know about the different paths people take in military service." The request was unexpected and thoughtful. Sarah could see that Brad had given considerable thought to how he might contribute to preventing similar incidents in the future. "That's an interesting idea," Sarah replied. "What exactly did you have in mind?" "Well, ma'am, I think a lot of us come out of SEAL training with a pretty narrow view of what military excellence looks like. We focus so much on physical training and combat skills that we don't always appreciate the other kinds of expertise that are just as important to the mission." Brad paused and gathered his thoughts before continuing. "I thought maybe you could talk about intelligence work, about how language skills and cultural knowledge contribute to operations, about what it's like to serve in the kinds of assignments that most of us never see." Sarah found herself genuinely impressed by the young man's proposal. The idea showed maturity and a real commitment to learning from the earlier incident. It also demonstrated an understanding that the problems they had identified went beyond the behavior of just 3 individuals. "Let me think about that," Sarah said. "It's actually a very good idea. Have you discussed this with Chief Rodriguez?" "Yes, ma'am. He thought it was worth pursuing, but he said I should talk to you directly first." Sarah smiled, the first genuinely warm expression she had shown toward any of the 3 SEALs since the original incident. "I appreciate you taking the initiative on this, Petty Officer Stevens. I think it could be valuable for everyone involved." Over the next few days, the idea evolved into a more formal proposal. Chief Rodriguez worked with the Base Education Office to organize a professional development seminar that would be mandatory for all recent SEAL graduates. The session would feature presentations from various specialists who worked in different areas of naval operations. Lieutenant Chun agreed to participate, along with officers from logistics, medical services, communications, and other support specialties. The goal was to help combat personnel understand the full scope of modern military operations and the diverse skills required for mission success. The seminar was scheduled for a Thursday afternoon in the base auditorium. As the day approached, Sarah found herself both nervous and excited about the opportunity. She had given presentations before, but this one felt particularly important because of the context and the potential impact on the audience. Jake Martinez and Kyle Thompson had also taken steps to address their behavior and its underlying causes. Jake had requested additional counseling to help him understand and overcome the prejudices that had led to his poor judgment. Kyle had volunteered for a diversity and inclusion committee that was working to improve the climate for all personnel on the base. The night before the seminar, Admiral Morrison stopped by Lieutenant Chen's office to discuss her presentation and to express his appreciation for her willingness to participate in the educational initiative. "Lieutenant," he said, settling into a chair across from her desk, "I want you to know how much I appreciate your approach to this entire situation. You could have demanded maximum punishment for those young men, but instead you've chosen to be part of a solution that will have much broader impact." Sarah looked up from her notes for the next day's presentation. "Thank you, sir. I think education is usually more effective than punishment when it comes to changing attitudes and behaviors." "I agree. Admiral Morrison replied, "And I think your presentation tomorrow will be an important step in helping our personnel understand the complexity and diversity of modern military service." He paused and then added, "I also want you to know that the selection board has approved your assignment to the Pacific intelligence operation we discussed. You'll be deploying as planned, with the additional credential of having helped establish a new standard for professional education here at Coronado." The news was gratifying confirmation that the incident hadn't negatively affected her career prospects. If anything, her professional handling of the situation seemed to have enhanced her reputation among senior leadership. As Thursday afternoon arrived, the base auditorium filled with personnel from various units and specialties. The recent SEAL graduates sat together in the front rows, while other attendees represented a cross-section of the base community. Admiral Morrison opened the session with remarks about the importance of understanding and appreciating the diverse skills that contributed to naval operations. His tone was serious but positive, emphasizing opportunity and growth rather than criticism and punishment. The Navy of today requires expertise in areas that didn't even exist a generation ago, he told the audience. Our effectiveness depends on our ability to recognize, develop, and utilize talent regardless of its source or its appearance. Lieutenant Chun was the third speaker of the afternoon. When she took the podium, she could see Jake, Kyle, and Brad in the front row, all paying careful attention to her words. "I want to start by talking about a mission I completed 18 months ago," Sarah began. "I can't share all the details because much of it remains classified, but I can tell you that it required me to operate undercover in a foreign country for 6 weeks, gathering intelligence that would help prevent a terrorist attack on American interests." The audience was immediately engaged. This was exactly the kind of real-world application that made abstract discussions about diversity and inclusion concrete and relevant. The success of that mission depended on several factors, Sarah continued. First, my ability to speak the local language fluently and to understand cultural nuances that would allow me to blend in effectively. Second, my training in intelligence gathering techniques that allowed me to obtain information without arousing suspicion. And third, my appearance and background, which enabled me to access environments that would have been impossible for someone who fit the traditional stereotype of an American military officer. She paused and looked directly at the 3 young SEALs who had precipitated this entire discussion. The point is that mission effectiveness often depends on capabilities and characteristics that aren't immediately obvious. The person sitting next to you might speak 4 languages, might have lived in 6 different countries, might have technical skills that are crucial to operations you've never heard of. Sarah's presentation continued for 20 more minutes, covering her training, her various assignments, and the ways that intelligence work supported combat operations. She concluded with observations about teamwork and the importance of recognizing and respecting the contributions of all personnel. When the seminar ended, there was enthusiastic applause and numerous questions from the audience. Several personnel approached Sarah afterward to express appreciation for her insights and to ask for more information about intelligence careers. Jake Martinez was among those who approached her after the session. His demeanor was completely different from their first encounter, reflecting genuine respect and interest. "Lieutenant Chun," he said, "thank you for that presentation. It really helped me understand how much I didn't know about military operations and about the people who serve in different capacities." Sarah studied his face and could see that his words reflected a genuine change in perspective. "I'm glad it was helpful, Petty Officer Martinez. I hope it will inform how you work with your colleagues going forward." "It will, ma'am," Jake replied sincerely. "I can promise you that." 6 months later, the transformation that had begun with a moment of conflict and misunderstanding had rippled throughout Naval Amphibious Base Coronado in ways that no one could have predicted. The incident involving Lieutenant Sarah Chun and the 3 SEAL graduates had evolved into something much larger and more significant than anyone had initially imagined. Lieutenant Chun had successfully completed her deployment to the Pacific Theater, where her intelligence work had contributed to a major international operation that disrupted several terrorist networks and strengthened relationships with allied nations. The mission had exceeded all expectations, and Sarah had returned to Coronado with a promotion to lieutenant commander and recognition from the highest levels of naval command. Her success had become a point of pride for the entire base, and Admiral Morrison made sure that her achievements were widely known among personnel at all levels. The young woman who had been dismissed and underestimated by 3 ignorant SEALs had proven herself to be one of the Navy's most valuable intelligence assets. But perhaps more importantly, the educational initiative that had grown out of that morning's confrontation had become a permanent part of the base's training program. The professional development seminars were now conducted quarterly, featuring speakers from diverse backgrounds and specialties who helped combat personnel understand the complexity of modern military operations. Chief Rodriguez had been instrumental in expanding the program beyond its original scope. He had worked with base leadership to develop comprehensive diversity and inclusion training that addressed not just obvious forms of discrimination, but also the subtle biases and assumptions that could undermine unit effectiveness and morale. The goal isn't to make everyone the same, Chief Rodriguez explained to each new group of participants. The goal is to help everyone understand that difference is a strength, not a weakness, and that our effectiveness depends on our ability to work with people who might not look like us or think like us. Jake Martinez had become one of the program's most effective advocates. His transformation from someone who had dismissed Sarah Chun based on prejudice to someone who actively promoted inclusion and respect had been remarkable. He had requested assignment to the base's diversity committee and had volunteered to share his story with new personnel as a cautionary tale about the dangers of assumptions and prejudice. During one such session, Jake stood before a group of newly arrived SEALs and told them about his encounter with Lieutenant Chun. His account was unflinchingly honest about his mistakes and their consequences. "I let my prejudices override my training and my values," he told the group. "I assumed that because Lieutenant Chun didn't look like what I thought a military leader should look like, she must not be qualified or capable. I was wrong in every possible way." He paused and looked at the faces of the young men listening to his story, seeing in some of them the same arrogance and narrow thinking that he had once displayed. While I was questioning her qualifications, she was being briefed by Admiral Morrison on one of the most important intelligence assignments in the Pacific Theater. While I was suggesting she didn't belong in military service, she was preparing for a mission that would require her to risk her life in defense of American interests. My ignorance and prejudice almost cost me my career, but more importantly, it revealed that I wasn't ready to be the kind of leader that the Navy needs. Jake's presentations were powerful because they came from someone who had lived through the consequences of prejudice and had chosen to learn and grow from the experience. His willingness to admit his mistakes and to work actively for change had earned him respect from colleagues and superiors alike. Kyle Thompson had taken a different, but equally meaningful path toward personal growth and professional development. He had used the incident as motivation to expand his own understanding of military operations and to develop skills that would make him a more effective team member. He had enrolled in language courses and had requested training in cultural awareness and cross-cultural communication. Kyle's efforts had paid off when he was selected for a joint training exercise with international partners, where his newfound language skills and cultural sensitivity made him an invaluable liaison between American and Allied forces. His commanding officers noted his exceptional performance and his ability to work effectively with personnel from diverse backgrounds. The whole experience taught me that being a good SEAL isn't just about physical capability, Kyle reflected during a conversation with Chief Rodriguez. It's about being able to adapt to different situations and work with different people. The world is complicated, and we need people who can handle that complexity. Brad Stevens had perhaps shown the most dramatic personal growth of the three. His initiative in proposing the educational seminar had demonstrated a maturity and thoughtfulness that impressed everyone who worked with him. He had continued to seek out opportunities to learn and to contribute to positive change within the military community. Brad had applied for and been accepted into an accelerated leadership development program that prepared junior personnel for increased responsibilities. His selection was based not only on his technical skills and performance, but also on his demonstrated commitment to diversity, inclusion, and professional growth. Petty Officer Stevens has shown exceptional potential for leadership, his evaluation stated. His ability to learn from mistakes, his commitment to personal growth, and his initiative in promoting positive change make him an ideal candidate for increased responsibility. Meanwhile, Lieutenant Commander Chun had been assigned to a new position at the Pentagon, where she was working on strategic intelligence planning for the Pacific region. Her experiences at Coronado, including both her successful mission and her role in the base's educational initiatives, had prepared her well for the complex challenges of her new assignment. Sarah often reflected on the morning when she had been confronted by 3 prejudiced young SEALs, and she was amazed by how that negative experience had ultimately led to positive changes that affected hundreds of people. The incident had forced important conversations about bias, respect, and professionalism that might not have happened otherwise. During a visit back to Coronado, Sarah had the opportunity to see the long-term impact of the changes that had been implemented. She attended one of the quarterly professional development seminars and was impressed by the level of engagement and the quality of the discussions that took place. Admiral Morrison, who was preparing for retirement after a distinguished career, took particular pride in the cultural changes that had taken place at the base during his command. The incident with Lieutenant Chun could have been a source of embarrassment and division, but instead it had become a catalyst for positive change that would benefit the Navy for years to come. Leadership isn't just about managing day-to-day operations. Admiral Morrison explained to a group of senior officers during one of his final staff meetings. It's about recognizing opportunities to make the organization better and having the courage to pursue change even when it's difficult or uncomfortable. He reflected on the morning when he had witnessed the confrontation between Sarah Chun and the 3 SEALs and how his decision to address the incident directly and constructively had led to much broader improvements in the base's culture and training programs. Lieutenant Commander Chin's response to that situation demonstrated exactly the kind of leadership and professionalism that we need at every level, Admiral Morrison said. She could have demanded punishment or retribution, but instead she chose to focus on education and growth. That choice made all the difference. The ripple effects of that morning's event had extended beyond Naval Amphibious Base Coronado. The training programs and policies that had been developed there had been adopted by other naval installations, and the Navy had begun implementing similar initiatives throughout the fleet. Jake Martinez, Kyle Thompson, and Brad Stevens had all gone on to successful careers, with each of them carrying forward the lessons they had learned from their encounter with Lieutenant Commander Chin. They had become advocates for diversity and inclusion, and they had worked to ensure that other young personnel didn't make the same mistakes they had made. During a chance encounter at a naval conference 2 years later, Jake had the opportunity to speak with Sarah Chun again. The conversation took place in a crowded reception room, but both of them remembered clearly the circumstances of their first meeting. "Commander Chun," Jake said, offering a respectful handshake, "I wanted to thank you again for how you handled our situation at Coronado. I know I've said it before, but your response changed my life and my career in ways I'm still discovering." Sarah smiled and accepted his handshake. "I'm glad to hear that you've continued to grow and learned, Petty Officer Martinez. That's what matters most." "Actually, it's Chief Martinez now," Jake replied with pride. "I was promoted last month, and I'm serving as a senior instructor at the Naval Special Warfare Training Center." "Congratulations," Sarah said sincerely. "I'm sure you're making a positive impact on the next generation of SEALs." "I try to," Jake replied. "I make sure that every class I teach understands the importance of respect and professionalism, and I tell them about the morning when I learned those lessons the hard way." Their conversation was interrupted by other conference attendees, but Both of them carried away a sense of satisfaction about how their relationship had evolved. What had begun as a confrontation rooted in prejudice and ignorance had transformed into mutual respect and shared commitment to making the military better. As Sarah walked away from the conversation, she reflected on the broader lessons of her experience at Coronado. The incident with the 3 SEALs had been painful and frustrating at the time, but it had ultimately led to positive changes that affected thousands of people. Her decision to respond with education rather than anger had created opportunities for growth and understanding that might not have existed otherwise. The military was far from perfect in its approach to diversity and inclusion, and there were still incidents of prejudice and discrimination that needed to be addressed. But the changes that had taken place at Coronado demonstrated that progress was possible when leaders were willing to confront problems directly and work toward constructive solutions. Years later, when Sarah was serving as a senior intelligence officer with responsibilities spanning multiple regions, she would often think about that morning at Naval Amphibious Base Coronado. The memory served as a reminder of the importance of standing up for principles while remaining open to opportunities for education and growth. The 3 young SEALs who had once questioned her qualifications had become respected leaders in their own right, each carrying forward the lessons they had learned about respect, professionalism, and the dangers of prejudice. Their transformation was a testament to the power of education and the possibility of change when people are willing to acknowledge their mistakes and work to become better. Admiral Morrison's decision to address the incident directly and constructively had created a model for how military leaders could handle similar situations in the future. His approach had demonstrated that discipline and education could work together to create positive change rather than simply punishing bad behavior. The story of that morning had become part of the culture at Naval Amphibious Base Coronado, told and retold as an example of how individuals and organizations could grow stronger through adversity. It was a reminder that even negative experiences could lead to positive outcomes when handled with wisdom, courage, and a commitment to making things better. Lieutenant Commander Sarah Chun had proven that leadership was not about appearance or conforming to stereotypes, but about character, competence, and the ability to inspire others to be their best selves. Her response to prejudice and disrespect had created lasting change that would benefit the Navy and the nation for generations to come. The moment when Admiral Morrison had bowed before her in recognition of her rank and achievements had been symbolic of something much larger. The military's ongoing evolution toward a more inclusive and professional force that recognized and valued the contributions of all its members, regardless of their background or appearance. In the end, what had started as a simple case of 3 young men making assumptions about a fellow service member had evolved into a powerful example of how organizations could learn, grow, and change for the better. The transformation of Jake Martinez, Kyle Thompson, and Brad Stevens from prejudiced bullies to respected leaders demonstrated that people were capable of fundamental change when given the opportunity and motivation to grow. The legacy of that morning would continue to influence military culture for years to come, serving as a reminder that respect, professionalism, and recognition of diverse talents were not just ideals to aspire to, but practical necessities for mission success in an increasingly complex world.